The night was supposed to be quiet, just another evening in a small town where everyone knew each other, or at least they thought they did. James Carter, a retired war veteran, had seen his fair share of battles, but nothing prepared him for the fight he was about to face in his own hometown. He had just stepped out of a local bar, the laughter of old friends still echoing in his mind, when the flashing red and blue lights caught his attention. Officer Randall, a man with a reputation for pushing his authority too far, pulled up with a glare that cut through the night. "You been drinking?" he asked, his voice sharp, already assuming guilt. James knew this game. He'd seen it before. He kept his hands steady, his voice calm, but Randall wasn't looking for reason. He was looking for control. Then, in an act so shocking it made time slow down, Randall grabbed a beer bottle from the ground and raised it high. The intent in his eyes was clear. But as the glass hovered in the air, something shifted. The moment he thought he had all the power was the moment everything changed. James didn't flinch. He had faced worse threats in combat, but something about this moment felt different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was home. And yet, here he was, standing in front of a man who saw him as an enemy. The bottle in Randall's hand trembled slightly, like even he wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. The street was quiet, the glow of a single street lamp flickering above them. A few bystanders watched from a distance, their faces tense, unsure whether to step in or stay out of it. James met Randall's eyes, his voice calm but firm. "You sure you want to do that?" It wasn't a threat, it was a question. One that made Randall hesitate for just a second. But pride was a dangerous thing. And Randall wasn't about to back down, not in front of witnesses. His fingers tightened around the bottle. The air felt heavier, like something was about to snap. James had been through enough to know when a man was desperate, and Randall looked just that, desperate. But why? Why him? Why now? James could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. There was something more, something deeper. Randall's grip on the bottle tightened, his knuckles turning white. His breathing was heavy, uneven, like he was fighting something inside himself. James had seen this kind of look before, not just in war, but in men who carried burdens too heavy to bear. But right now, that didn't matter. Right now, all that mattered was that this man in uniform was one wrong move away from crossing a line he couldn't come back from. A few more people had gathered now, their whispers floating through the thick night air. Some had their phones out, recording. James wasn't sure if that would make things better or worse. Randall saw them too, and for a split second, his expression changed. Was it fear? Guilt? Whatever it was, he masked it quickly. "Step back," he barked, as if trying to regain control. But his voice wavered, just enough for James to notice. James didn't move. He kept his hands where Randall could see them, making sure not to give him an excuse. "You're looking for something," James said slowly, "but I don't think it's me." Randall's jaw clenched. His eyes darted around, restless. There was something deeper going on, something personal. But what? And why was he taking it out on James? Randall's breathing grew more erratic, his fingers twitching around the bottle as if unsure whether to go through with it. The weight of the crowd, the cameras, the silent judgment pressing in on him. It was all becoming too much. James could see it. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was a man unraveling right in front of him. The night air felt thick with tension. A few feet away, a woman whispered, "Somebody needs to stop this." But no one moved. No one wanted to be the one to step between a cop and a man who had already survived too many battles. James, though, didn't have that option. He could feel the energy shifting, the moment slipping into something dangerous. "Randall," James said, steady but firm, "you don't want to do this." The officer's jaw tightened. His face was flushed, eyes darting between James, the growing crowd, and the flashing lights reflecting off nearby windows. His world was closing in. The power he once held was slipping through his fingers. Then, in a desperate move, he took a step forward, raising the bottle higher. The air stood still. The crowd gasped. James stayed rooted, his eyes locked on Randall's, waiting for what came next. The bottle hung in the air, Randall's hand trembling now, but his face was twisted in something beyond anger, fear, desperation, something James couldn't quite place. The tension in the air was suffocating, every eye locked on what would happen next. Then, just as Randall seemed ready to make his move, a sharp voice cut through the night. "Officer Randall, stand down." A second patrol car had pulled up, and stepping out was Sergeant Miller, a senior officer with years on the force. His presence was commanding, and for the first time, Randall looked truly uncertain. His grip loosened just slightly, but he didn't lower the bottle. James watched as Miller's eyes darted between him and Randall, quickly assessing the situation. "This isn't the way," Miller said firmly. "Put it down." Randall's breathing was shallow, his pupils dilated. It was clear now. He wasn't just acting out of aggression. Something else was driving him. Then, just when it seemed like he might listen, he did something no one expected. He turned the bottle, not toward James, but toward himself. The crowd gasped, phones shaking in their hands. James instinctively stepped forward, heart pounding. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than him, and it wasn't over yet. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Randall's grip on the bottle was loose, but his hands shook violently. His eyes, filled with something darker than anger, darted around as if searching for an escape. But there wasn't one. Not from this. Not from whatever had been eating away at him long before tonight. James took a careful step forward. "Randall, talk to me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't the answer." Randall flinched, his breath ragged. His fingers flexed, then tightened again around the bottle. Miller took a slow step closer, hand hovering near his holster, but not reaching for it just yet. The crowd held its breath, some still recording, others frozen in place. Then, just as suddenly as the chaos had begun, Randall's shoulders slumped. His body seemed to deflate, like the fight had drained out of him all at once. His hand opened, and the bottle slipped from his fingers, shattering against the pavement. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, staring at the broken glass like it held all his regrets. Miller moved in, placing a firm hand on Randall's shoulder. "It's over," he said. But James knew better. Something about this wasn't adding up. And then the final twist revealed itself. As the officers moved Randall toward the car, a voice in the crowd called out, "Tell them the truth, Randall." A man stepped forward, an older gentleman, his face lined with age and grief. "Tell them why you really stopped him." Randall stiffened, his eyes darting toward the man. For the first time, true panic flickered across his face. James turned toward the stranger. "What truth?" he asked. The man exhaled, his voice heavy with something James couldn't yet name. "It's not about race," he said. "It's about his father." The crowd murmured. Randall looked away. James felt his chest tighten. His father. What did his father have to do with any of this? The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. And suddenly, James realized, this wasn't just about him. This was something much, much deeper. James felt the weight of the moment settle in. His father, what did he have to do with this? He turned to Randall, searching his face for answers. But the officer refused to meet his eyes. The older man stepped closer, his voice filled with something raw. "Your father and his, they were in the same unit," he said. "Vietnam. But only one of them made it home." James's chest tightened. His father had never spoken much about the war, about the men he fought beside. But now, looking at Randall, he saw something familiar. Pain, guilt, a history neither of them had chosen, but were now forced to face. Randall finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father saved my dad's life," he admitted. "And mine. He never forgave himself for surviving." His eyes were glassy, lost. "I spent my whole life carrying that." Silence filled the air. The anger, the tension, it all suddenly made sense. It wasn't hate that fueled Randall's actions, it was something more complicated. James exhaled slowly. The past doesn't have to define us, he said. Randall lowered his head, and just like that, the night that almost broke them both finally came to an end.